Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear participants. So, today's lecture, which is related to oaths and their atonement, is actually the last chapter of the book. However, once all of the lectures have been given, the whole series will be arranged in the sequence of the book itself. So, today we will speak about oaths and their atonement. We all know that the emphasis which Islam and, in fact, religion lays on fulfilling our oaths. Once a person gives his word or her word, it is incumbent upon him or her to fulfill that word. It is not only our moral duty but also our social responsibility that we always fulfill our promises, abide by our words, and of course, there could be situations in which we might not be able, because of some exceptional or some compelling circumstances, to fulfill our oath, which in case, of course, would entail certain exceptions. But you can see the amount of stress and emphasis which Quran has laid on fulfilling an oath is something that we must always keep in mind. So just to present before you one of the verses of the Quran which tells us that how important it is to fulfill an oath. So this is Surah number 16, verse 91, that is appearing on your screens. So the words are وَأَوْفُوا بِعَهْدِ اللَّهِ إِذَا أَعْهَدتُّمْ. So the first thing is fulfill the covenant of Allah, fulfill the promise with Allah when you have entered into it. So you see the words إِذَا أَعْهَدتُّمْ, they actually emphasize the fact that, well, in the first instance, people must realize that they are entering in a very important arrangement, and that is that they are making a promise with God. So either they don't make it, but if they make it, then as the Quran says, وَأَوْفُوا بِعَهْدِ اللَّهِ, you fulfill your covenant, you fulfill your promise with God when you have entered into it. وَلَا تَنْقُضُوا الْإِيمَانَ أَيْمَانَ بَعْدَ تَوْكِيدِهَا, and break not your oaths after you have confirmed them. So, وَلَا تَنْقُضُوا الْأَيْمَانَ بَعْدَ تَوْكِيدِهَا وَقَدْ جَعَلْتُمُ اللَّهَ عَلَيْكُمْ كَفِيلًا. Indeed, you have made Allah your witness over yourselves. So, this is the essence of the oath, because when you are bearing an oath, when you are swearing an oath, then you are actually presenting God as a witness to the fulfillment of your word, which is then very important that you must keep by it and abide by it. And then it says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَعْلَمُ مَا تَفْعَلُونَ. Indeed, God knows all that you do. So if there is some exceptional situation in which a person might not be able to fulfill his oath, he or she must, of course, then go in a way that there are certain things which the Sharia stipulates, certain exceptions which are given to the Sharia by the Sharia in this regard, and these exceptions, of course, are always at times common sense exceptions. A person might have fulfilled or might have sworn an oath. He might have said something that he would do or she would do, and then realize that this is something of an impossibility, or maybe some very, very important or legitimate grounds have come about on the basis of which this fulfillment cannot be made. So the Quran says that once you swear an oath, once you when you make God your witness in this regard, then you have to follow that. But if the situation arises because of any contingent circumstances that you have to break your oath, then there is an atonement which has been suggested by the Quran. So it becomes a very important matter. It's just not the case that if you are not able to fulfill the oath, you just need to apologize to the person or to the Almighty. No, the Almighty says that in case you have to break an oath, then there is a certain atonement for that. So the Quranic directive in this regard is now being displayed before you. This is verse 89 and Surah number 5. This tells you how the Almighty has conveyed His intent that if there is any sort of breach in this matter, then how this breach must be tackled. So the words are, لا يؤاخذكم الله باللغو في أيمانكم ولكن يؤاخذكم بما عقدتم الأيمان فكفارته إطعام 10 مساكين من أوسط ما تطعمون أهليكم أو كسوتهم أو تحرير رقبة فمن لم يجد فصيام 3 أيام ذلك كفارة أيمانكم إذا حلفتم واحفظوا أيمانكم كذلك يبين الله لكم آياته لعلكم تشكرون. Allah will not hold you accountable for your inadvertent oaths, but He will definitely hold you accountable for oaths you swear with solemn intention. So, if such an oath is broken, its atonement is feeding of 10 needy persons of a standard with which you normally feed your own families. So, this is the first thing. Or the clothing of 10 needy people, or the liberation of one slave. But whosoever cannot afford these should fast for 3 days. This is the atonement for the oaths when you have sworn, and be true to that which has been sworn. Thus Allah explains to you His verses that you may be grateful. So you see, the first thing that has to be understood, which is very clear, that God will not take us to task for things or for oaths that have been sworn inadvertently. The verse starts off with the fact that La yu'akhizukumullahu bil-laghwi fi aymanikum, that He will not hold people accountable for oaths that are broken inadvertently. And similarly, He will definitely, the Quran says, He will hold us accountable that if these oaths are sworn with solemn intention, for example, you are absolutely aware and you are fully cognizant, and then you end up breaking that oath, the Almighty says that this is something that then must be regarded to be a serious matter, and then you have to atone for that. But as far as inadvertent oaths are concerned, God says that you will not be held accountable for that. So you can see that as far as the atonement is concerned, it can be broken up. And the first atonement is that you have to feed 10 needy people. So any 10 needy people that a person is required to feed is the task that he is at hand. And the important thing to realize here, dear viewers, is that the Quran says that they should be of the same standard. I mean, the food that you serve those needy people should be of the same standard as you generally feed your own families with. So should not be some food of inferior quality, but the standard of living that you maintain, which is of course different for different people. So the same food should be given to the people who are in need for that. And then the Quran says that if this is not possible, you are not able to do that, then you can clothe 10 needy people. So the first option is that you have to, you can, in order to atone for your broken oath, you can feed 10 needy people. And if this is not possible, then you can clothe 10 needy people who are in need of clothes. And after that, it says that if even that is not possible, then you liberate a slave. So we know that in the times of Prophet, in the times when the Quran was being revealed, slavery was an issue. The Prophet and his companions and the whole Muslim community had inherited slavery, and it was gradually eradicated. It was gradually finished from the society. But during that time, there was this tremendous movement that was launched by the Quran, so that slavery could be gradually eradicated from the Arab society, because it was deeply rooted. And amongst the various measures it did adopt was that it actually appealed to people that they should liberate slaves themselves as much as they can. And one of the measures that in this regard was that if they commit a sin, if they commit some wrongdoing, then they should liberate a slave. We have this liberation of slaves in other wrongdoings as well. But here we find the Quran telling us that if a person is not able to feed or to clothe 10 needy people, then the third option that he has is that he can liberate a slave. Today, of course, we don't have this option, because slavery was abolished by the Quran earlier on, although it persisted even later due to reasons where we will be discussed, inshallah, when we will be discussing slavery in this series. But today, by analogy, we can make use of this concession by, for example, freeing people who might be needing some money to get them liberated from jails maybe, or they are imprisoned and the only thing that is needed is money for their bail. So money can be used in this manner under this head as well. And then the Quran goes on and gives a fourth option, and the fourth option is that whosoever cannot afford these should fast for 3 days. Then the fourth option is that even if these three things are not possible, neither are you in a position to feed 10 people, nor are you in a position to clothe them, and neither can you have the option of liberating a slave, then the fourth option for you is that you fast for 3 days. And the Quran says that this is the atonement for the oaths when you have sworn, and be true to that which you have sworn. So see, this is the important area in which we have to understand that the Quran has given it a very, very important emphasis in this regard. And also, people might have this question in mind that at times they have to exercise the first, or they want to exercise the first option, for example, to feed 10 needy people or to clothe them, and you might not be having people around you, or maybe you have some other option. So, by analogy, what can also be done is that the amount of in currency of what is needed to feed 10 needy people or to clothe them, that could be donated to for the cause of charity, to charitable organizations, or to any other charitable endeavor. So obviously, this was in the case of the Quran, because in the time of the Prophet, the charitable or the charity that was looked up towards most would be to help out individuals. There were no organizations in those times, and needy people needed to be clothed, they needed to be fed. But this again is something that we can calculate, as I said, food which is consumed by 10 people, and similarly the clothes which can be worn by 10 people, and the amount can be then donated. Now, something that I would also now like to present is that Ustaz Javed Ahmed Ghamidi now has also given us a summary of this law in his Meezan, and he has actually stipulated some points, and he has said that these are important points that must be kept in mind while we are understanding this law. I'm just going to read out that part of this summary from you. So the first thing that he says is that at times an oath is totally absurd, nonsensical, and meaningless. No doubt a believer should refrain from pledging such oaths. However, it is a great favor and blessing of the Almighty that He will not hold people accountable for the fulfillment of such oaths, neither in this world nor in the hereafter. So as the Quran has said, that it will not hold people responsible for what they swear inadvertently, or if they sworn something which is absolutely stupid or silly or absurd, then of course this is something which the Almighty will not hold people accountable to. The second thing which these verses have also pointed out is that if an oath is pledged with a solemn will and intention, or if some contract has been made on its basis, or it has an effect on the rights and obligations of the parties involved, or it infringes upon the injunctions of the Sharia, the Almighty would definitely hold a person responsible for it. So a person must not be careless and indiscreet in this matter. On the contrary, he should be very responsible in this regard. And then the third point that he has made, of course, is something that we have already discussed, and that is the actual atonement, or the various options of atonement that we have been given. So I'm just going to also read them out once again before you, so that we are able to keep them in mind. So if owing to some reason a person is forced to break such an oath, then he must atone for it. For this, he is required to feed 10 poor people with the standard of food he normally feeds his own family, or to give them clothes to wear, or to liberate a slave. If he is unable to do either of these, then he must fast for 3 days. So this shows how important in the eyes of God is the fact that if a person has to break an oath in any way, or to break a promise, then it is not just a simple matter. It must be atoned. It is a sin. It is something which the Almighty says that, well, if it is broken for any reason, then these are the things that a person must do to rectify the situation. In this regard, also important is the fact that Prophet Muhammad ﷺ has provided us with guidance regarding these oaths and adjurations, and Ustaz has also summarized that guidance in a few words. I'm also now going to read out that guidance from the Prophet. So earlier on, we have discussed how the Quran has so vehemently and emphatically said that if oaths which are sworn advertently with full intention, and if they are broken, then they have to be atoned for. Now we find the Prophet also guiding us and giving us direction, and of course his direction is based on the stipulates, on the adjudications of the Quranic verses themselves. So the first thing which the Quran says that a nazar is also a form of an oath, and clearly this is something which we can understand, that nazar means a vow. When we pledge that we make something or do something, for the cause of God, or for any task that we set upon ourselves, that the Quran and the Prophet says that the vow will be treated analogous to an oath. And this is something of a very, very common sense analogy which the Prophet himself has done, that we cannot treat vows differently from promises and oaths. So he says that if a vow is broken, if you break a vow, then it will be atoned in a similar manner in case it is broken. And it says kafaratul nazar, kafaratul yameen. So this is something which has been reported from the Prophet, that he has said, which means that the atonement of a nazar, the atonement of a vow which has been made, is the same as that of an oath. And there is no difference. And as I said, this is something which is very understandable. The second thing that he is reported to have said is that if you pledge an oath for something and a better alternative comes your way, break the oath and atone for it and do what is better. Again, you can see how the Prophet has picked up from what the Quran has said and directed us that this is something which is present in the directive from its very origin, that if you have to break an oath, because the option of breaking an oath is an option and you have to atone for that. So if some oath has been made and you find a better alternative come along, then again something that can be done is that you break your previous oath and you adopt that better alternative, that better option. But then you have to atone for the oath. You have to atone for the oath. And as the Prophet is reported to have said, وَأْتِلْ لَذِي هُوَ خَيْرٌ, then do what is better. So these are options, these are situations that might arise in our own lives, that we have made an oath and we have committed something and the better alternative comes along, and that alternative, when it is better, of course, the Quran says that the option is such that every person and we ourselves clearly see that this is such a better alternative that we should not be bound by the previous oath and miss this opportunity which might afford itself to us. So we should break that oath previously that we have sworn and make a fresh oath and then atone for the oath that we have broken. And the final guidance which is provided by the Prophet in this regard is that swearing by any other than the Almighty is an act of polytheism. So everyone should swear by the Almighty only. So the Prophet is reported to have said, "Man halafa bi ghayrillah faqad ashrak," which means he who swore by any other than God has committed an act of polytheism. So this is also something very important. We swear by so many entities. We swear by the lives of people. We swear by the Quran. We swear by people we love. But and we swear by many other things that we at times call into our own witness. But the Quran says that the only legal way to swear by any entity is God Himself. Why? You see, the essence of the oath is to bear witness. And when you say that you swear by some being like the Almighty, for example, then it actually means that you bear witness because God actually bears witness to this. So when you say that I swear by God, it actually means that I make God as my witness that I am going to complete this task. This is something that I will do. So as far as this is concerned, it has to be understood that the essence of an oath is to bear witness. When you say that I swear by something, then that thing is actually your witness to that. So when you say that I swear by my mother or I swear by my father, of course this is not possible, because when you are making someone your witness, that witness has to be present as far as the task that you undertake is concerned. And only God is someone who is omnipresent. He is always there for you, and He only is the person or the being with whom we can say that He is present with us, and we can only bear witness through Him. And this is something, this is a practice that goes on in our society, and it needs to be checked, that an oath must always be sworn by the Almighty and not by any other entity, because this is something that if you do, then you make that entity bear witness as if that entity is always present on that oath. And because if you do that, that will be associating someone with the rights of God, because only God has this right of being omnipresent, to be present everywhere and always be there. Precisely for this reason, the Almighty says, the Prophet says that if one does that, if someone bears an oath by someone other than God, then this is an act of polytheism. This is an act of shirk, and it must not be done. So viewers, with this we come to an end to this topic. It was a short topic, and so since this is the closing part of Meezan, I would like to reiterate, although we have not finished the book, but since this is the last lecture in its, or should be the last lecture of the series is arranged, so it does seem appropriate that once again the principles which he has used or his approach which is based on be once again be refreshed in our minds, so that we are able to once again see that the way that he has written his book is something that we have of course studied now, but as far as its understanding is concerned, we will be doing, or in the next step we will be able to appreciate much more if we once again start comparing his approach and his understanding to other approaches. Then the salient features would be evident to us. So I'm just going to present before you these salient features, that as far as the book of is concerned, and what are these principles. So the first principle is that the author has regarded the Quran to be the Meezan, or the scale, which means that it is the book in which everything has to be weighed. Anything which is against the Quran in any way cannot be accepted. And in this regard, there are things that we have to understand. That first of all, that no variant reading of the Quran will be accepted. There is only just one mutawatir reading, which is called Qira'atul Amma, and that is before us. It is in the form, it is present before us. It is in the living tradition of the Muslims. So the author has made use of this Qira'atul Amma everywhere, and the principle that he has followed as a result of the fact that the Quran is the Meezan, it is the Furqan, that no other reading is deemed to be the Quran. So this is the first corollary of the fact that he has declared vis-a-vis the Quran being regarded as the final authority. So I'm just reading out those corollaries before you, or enumerating those corollaries. The first point, or the first point of his approach, is that the Quran is the final authority. And a subcategory of this would be that no variant reading can be acceptable, because that would be against the principle of regarding the Quran to be the final authority. The next thing that he has mentioned is that as far as the muhkam and the mutashabih verses of the Quran are concerned, they are distinct, and we can easily discern them. People just cannot say that there are certain verses which are muhkam and mutashabih and out of their own whims, because the word mutashabih actually means that these are the verses about which the matters of the Almighty, of the hereafter, and certain other aspects have been presented in the form of a parable or a simile. So these things which are mentioned in the form of tashbih, because of the fact that those things have yet to come into existence, we don't know what's going to happen the hereafter in the exact sense. But the language which is that we use, there are certain words have been used so that we are able to at least have some idea of what the Almighty implies when certain events are reported to happen in the hereafter. So at times those events are portrayed in the language that we understand, and these are the verses that are called mutashabih, and therefore they are absolutely distinct, and no one can say that this is a matter which is left to his own discretion or to his own whims, and as a result people can end up regarding to be any verse which is muhkam, any verse to be mutashabih, or any verse to be a muhkam verse. No, the mutashabihat are verses which are absolutely certain. We can determine them. The third thing that he has mentioned, which again is a corollary of the first principle. So remember, we are discussing the first principle of his approach, and that is that the Quran is the scale, it is the Meezan, it is the final authority. So the third aspect of this is that the Quran is a univocal book that conveys its meaning with absolute clarity, and there is no ambiguity in them. The intentionality of its text is certain and unmistakable. Its words convey what they stand for with full certainty. Difference in its interpretations have arisen not because of any defect in the language, but because of the fact that human beings at times do not concentrate fully, and there could be a lack of reflection and deliberation in them. And the second thing is that there could be a lack of knowledge on their part. So as far as the vehicle of the Quran is concerned, the means which it has adopted to convey itself is the means, what we call the language. And that language is absolutely unambiguous. You just cannot make a mistake when you're understanding that language, unless you commit that mistake, as I said, because of our own human shortcomings. As far as the language itself is concerned, language per se is something which is equipped already inherently with being unambiguous. And the fourth thing which the author has stated as a corollary to the approach that the Quran is the book of God, it is the final book of God, and it's the scale and the authority, the Meezan, and that is that the Hadith is a historical record of its prophetic teaching, of the prophet's teachings, and the Hadith can in no way modify or change the scope of any Quranic verse. And as far as the Quran is concerned, it cannot be interpreted in the light of the Hadith. So this is an important principle or an important corollary. However, a Hadith has to be interpreted in the light of the Quran. So generally, it is the other way around. But the approach which the author has offered here with regard to a corollary of the first point is that the Quran has to be interpreted directly from its text, from its linguistic aspects, from its context, from its parallels, and from the various instruments that we call now the instruments of appreciating a language. And as far as outside or extraneous content is concerned, which includes hadith, asar, and historical narratives, they can only be accepted if they are in line with this understanding which the Quran conveys. So this is the first principle which the author has adopted, and you can see how far he has been able to be successful in adopting this principle. As I said, is a question that every reader can decide for himself or herself. The second thing which the author has adopted while he has written this book is that the Sunnah is an independent source of religion. So just as the Quran is an independent source of religion, the Sunnah is an important source of religion. It is distinct from Hadith. So generally, these two terms are confused. They are regarded to be equal, but you can clearly see that the people, as far as they have gone through his book, that these are two independent sources of the Quran. In fact, the Sunnah precedes the Quran. It is something which was set in practice by Prophet Abraham himself. Yes, at times a Hadith has some record of the Sunnah, but they are two entirely different things. And as far as the Sunnah is concerned, it was initiated by the Prophet himself, and he asked his companions to transmit it through their practical perpetuation. But as far as the Hadith is concerned, the Hadith actually came into being, or the corpus of Hadith actually came into being at the initiative of the companions. It was they who thought that, well, they have learned something valuable from the mouth of the Prophet, and it has to be transmitted to other people as well, and they started doing so. And it was transmitted to us in the form of isolate reports. So therefore, as far as Hadith is concerned, it is something that will always be needed to be judged against the guidance provided by the Quran, by the Sunnah, by the precepts of sense and reason, and by the knowledge derived from history as well. From the certitude which is given to us in this regard has to be understood, that it is the Sunnah which is as certain in its purport as the Quran itself. But Hadith it's something which is very distinct from these two sources. And we have seen how the author has gone through. I mean, he's adopted this principle in his approach while writing this book. The third important statute which you can see from the author's approach is that the Sharia portion of the book has been entirely cleansed from fiqh. So you don't find any fiqh or anything which is not the Sharia. The Sharia, of course, here refers to the law which is revealed by the Almighty Himself, and the fiqh is at times the understanding and the analogy which the jurists and interpreters of the Quran have understood, or they actually add to that understanding. So all laws which are revealed by the Almighty, they can be termed as the Sharia, and laws which have been enacted by human beings from the understanding of Sharia are found in the fiqh. So in this book, you have found that the Quran and that the Sharia and the fiqh are now two separate entities. And as far as the Sharia is concerned, it is based on the author's understanding of these divine laws. And as far as the specific circumstances in which these laws are interpreted, and there are areas in which this interpretation has to be made, and that is why, and those instances are ones in which you will find that the Sharia is at times silent. and you need to exercise your own judgment in finding out the purport of the Sharia. So this is another important area, that you will not find the Sharia and the fiqh side by side in this book. It is primarily a book which is based on the understanding of the Sharia, which is one part of the components of Islam, as we have already discussed. The fourth important thing which the author has followed while writing this book is the fact that he has separated the Sunnatullah from the Sharia. So we have discussed that there are certain things which the Almighty himself these things are peculiar to the Almighty, and only He has the prerogative to conduct those things, and they have been termed as a Sunnatullah, or the practices and the dealings of the Prophet, of God. And for example, one of those practices is the practice of Itmamul Hujjah, which means the Almighty, in the times of His own messengers, He delineates the truth to such an extent that it cannot be only a person who would deliberately deny it is given the chance to do so. Otherwise, if he has no legitimate reason to deny the truth. Now, this is a practice, a Sunnatullah of God, and you have seen how the author has separated the Sunnatullah from the Sharia, because the Sunnatullah is something which only God has the authority. He himself has the prerogative, and no other person has the prerogative. So, as a further example, I can explain that the law of Itmamul Hujjah, as a result of that, which we have discussed, it shows that the punishments of polytheism, the punishments of apostasy, the punishments of disbelief, these are the punishments which only God has the authority to give, and these are corollaries of His Sunnatullah, of His practice. And in the times of God's messengers, these punishments were given because it was God who was giving these punishments through them, and He will do so again on the Day of Judgment. But we don't have any authority outside this ambit to conduct them, because they are God's practices, they are His sunnahs. He does them either directly or through His messengers only, not through any other person. So we see how the author has dealt with this issue as well. The fifth important aspect of this book is that the categorization of the Quran regarding the contents is also something that he has held on dearly to, and that is that he has divided religion into two components, that is Sharia and Hikmah. And this is in line with the Quran itself, which how the Quran says, يُعَلِّمُهُمُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةِ, that the Prophet would convey to people the Sharia and the Hikmah. Al-Kitab is also a word for the Sharia. It's a synonym for the word. So he has divided his book into these two broad categories. One is Sharia and the other is Al-Hikmah. The Sharia, of course, deals with divine laws, and the Hikmah it deals with the tenets of faith and also with morality. So as you can see from the book itself, that the scheme of the book is that it is divided into these two components. And finally, the thing that I would like to say is that his overall approach is text-based. It is something which is primarily dependent on the text and of the transmission of that text to us. So each section of a chapter of this book begins with a verse of the Quran. So this is something that you will also see in the book, that whenever he has charted his course in discussing a particular chapter of the Quran, for example, if he discusses the Sharia of economics, or the Sharia of preaching, or the Sharia of jihad, it will be divided into sections, and each of those sections will begin with the Quranic guidance or guidance from the Quran itself. And as a result, the whole book would be arranged in a form that the text of the Quran will hold precedence over everything. And of course, this is the corollary also of the fact that the Quran is the book which is the scale, which is the Meezan, and it is a book through which all the discussions of religion should be initiated. So I can see that this is how the author has presented his approach, his interpretative approach, and so it does seem appropriate to revise this approach every now and then, and especially in the last chapter of this book, so that once we have finished the book, we are able now to understand that when we have what we have before us is the product of this particular approach. Of course, no approach is fault-free. The application of an approach at times has its own problems. Human error always creeps in and can creep in, and therefore this book basically his understanding of the contents of Islam, keeping in view these principles. They can be critically evaluated, they can be critically revisited, but it is appropriate that we know at least that these are the principles that he has followed. So today I will end my talk here.